Chaos in Kos. The Greek island finds itself on the front line of the migrant crisis. Syrian refugees are being processed, but that's led to fighting because other migrants say they're being left behind. So what is the processing criteria and who gets to decide? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Mike Hanna. We are witnessing the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War, and yet a solid solution still seems far away. Nearly 250,000 migrants have crossed the Mediterranean to Europe this year, according to the International Organization for Migration. Of these, about half have come to the Greek islands, including Kos. There, the situation is desperate. It's hot, food and water are scarce, and many migrants are living in tents or in cardboard boxes on the street. Despite perception among many Europeans, the majority of migrants trying to reach Europe are fleeing from conflict as well as poverty. It's an important distinction because people fleeing war are given greater rights under international law than economic migrants. Syrians make up some 60% of people trying to get to European shores, and a large number of migrants are coming from Eritrea, Somalia, Afghanistan and Iraq. As Emma Hayward reports, Greek authorities are struggling to cope with the large number of migrants.
It's unclear who started it, but there was no holding back. As anger, frustration and suspicion boiled over under the intensity of the summer sun. Many had come hoping to get the papers to allow them to leave Kos for the mainland, but the police station was closed. And disappointment and desperation turned into chants of freedom. Some here say others are getting preferential treatment.
Just Iran, no ticket, no paper. What happened? Please, can you help?
The situation on Kos is becoming increasingly urgent. Even a loaf of bread is precious. Some people have found shelter and even a shower, but the facilities are being criticised.
In camp, there is no electricity, no water and no food. There is too little children in camps and women and girls and boys. They're not giving us food.
Hundreds of migrants are being moved on. This boat left for Athens on Friday. Another passenger ferry, where Syrians will be given priority, has started operating. It will act as a floating reception centre. Every day there are more arrivals, many crossing the short distance from Turkey. Greece was not prepared for this, and Athens has called for help from the outside world. It is, though, still waiting. Emma Hayward, Al Jazeera.
Well, time now to bring in our guests. From Kos, we have Christopher Miller, a conflict and crisis correspondent for Mashable. In Geneva, Joel Millman, spokesman for the International Organization for Migration. And from Durham in the UK, Tom Brooks, a specialist in immigration law and policy. Welcome to you all. Let's begin in Kos with Christopher Miller. The Greek authorities are making a plea for some kind of international assistance. What should be done to attempt to alleviate the situation as quickly as possible?
That's a very good question. First and foremost, it's very evident that they're very short-staffed. Putting more people here to help at reception centers, particularly this new ship that is at port right now here in Kos, would go a long way. As your correspondent mentioned, there were fights that broke out at the police station, which was also being used as a reception center for migrants who had fled Pakistan, Afghanistan, Iran, many from Iraq as well. I think first and foremost, just putting more able-bodied people here in Kos who can help to receive what is a mass influx of people coming over.
Well, Joel Millman, your view, what must be done in the short term?
Short term is guaranteeing the rights of migrants, the safety, the sanitation of where they are. We would imagine that the Greek authorities, as has happened in other countries, will want to move them to more secure locations. What's happened throughout Europe, not just Greece, but obviously Italy and even places like Hungary, is a large influx that local authorities aren't often equipped to handle easily. And yet they have an added problem, which is that many of the people that come in don't stay more than 72 hours. So they face criticism for not processing them and keeping them, and they face criticism for keeping them and not keeping them properly. So we have to address the fact that this is a fluid situation. It's going to continue. It's a record-breaking year, and it looks like the tide is going to get stronger through the rest of the summer. So I guess we have to do our best, and we applaud all authorities, civil and federal, that are doing the best they can right now.
Well, Tom Brooks, I mean, we're talking about what are essentially transit points, and yet there does appear to be no overall policy of how to deal with people within this window. As we heard Joel mention there, we're talking about 72-hour periods. It's a place of transport, but there doesn't appear to be any overarching policy in place.
It doesn't. I mean, what they've been doing effectively is what they've been doing for some time. So they have what staff they've got are used to doing an initial registration of people who come and claim refugee status. They'll then get a paper allowing, showing that they're allowed to be resident in Greece while their case is being determined, and then later they'll have to speak with some kind of caseworker. But what's happened is that the people who've come to Kos haven't come overnight. This has been happening for quite some time. And these numbers should have been anticipated. There should have been more done. The European Union has only recently decided to award Greece some more money so that it can build some better reception centers and so on. But this is often too little too late. The money hasn't been received. The centers aren't up. They're going to take a while to happen anyway. And it's all a bit too little too late.
Well, Joel Bullman, is there the possibility that there can be more proactive steps being taken? For example, putting immigration officials into transit places like Kos in order to pre-vet them, to hasten the process. The perception very much that national states cower behind their national boundaries rather than reaching out to help immigrants in points of transit like Kos.
Well, that's been suggested, not first in Greece. We heard about talk like that for Libya, for Sudan, for Turkey last year, and we think that there's a lot of merit to that idea, putting people in the countries where they're leaving from, not just the first transit destination point, especially since, as you said earlier, a large majority appear to be coming from countries that already merit asylum because of the conflict they're fleeing. So countries are almost on record saying we would accept almost everyone from these countries to begin with. Why not meet them where they are safe now, say in Turkey, other places, Lebanon, Jordan, and begin the processing there? We're very much in favor of that.
Well, Christopher Miller, we hear from the UK in particular that poverty does not constitute grounds for immediate asylum, yet as has been pointed out, the vast majority of these would-be migrants are in fact fleeing conflict, as did hundreds of thousands, for example, during the Bosnian War, who were received, incidentally, much more easier into Europe than the current wave of migrants. Would you agree?
I would agree, yes. I mean, what we're seeing is a huge influx of people, but predominantly Syrians who are fleeing a civil war. And I mean, they are getting preferential treatment here, and hopefully with this ship at port now, they can be processed a little bit quicker, make it to Athens, and be on their way to the many different places that they would like to go. Hopefully we get some more positive messages from countries like the UK, for example, who could certainly play a very big role in helping to receive this mass influx of people coming to Europe.
Tom Brooks, there does appear to be a mindset within Europe, for example, that the issue is one of security. If you look at the budgeting, you see millions, if not billions of euros being spent on stopping people from coming into these countries, money that may be far better served in terms of helping them migrate. Is that a fair comment?
Well, I think it probably is. I think there's far more worry about beefing up the borders to keep people out than necessarily welcoming everyone in. There's a divide in Europe. You've got some countries that have been more welcoming of migrants, recognizing that they have populations that are decreasing and that they'll need more workers to come in and maintain the overall general welfare system for their citizens as they age, the aging problem for many countries in Europe. You have other countries in Europe, the UK, that has a different view, where there's a lot of concern about the level of migration that's already here. So I think that's, one issue is the European Union coming together and having a unified view of exactly what is in the European Union's interest. How will it handle this migration crisis, which has been going on for some time? It's been going on for a better part of a year at least, and it's set to continue much further. But also, as you say, looking at, is the priority, should it be building higher walls and sending out more sniffer dogs, as was happening in Calais? Or should it be instead some other thing of making the best use of the talents that are coming? A lot of these people are fleeing war-torn areas and poverty and so on. But also, you've got a lot of people here who are engineers, doctors, who have various skills that could be put to very good use. And aren't being put to good use. So I think there are some countries, as noted by one of the panelists, in making the most use of the talent that is coming across, whereas you still have this other problem of other countries that are skeptical and are much less willing to open the borders more.
I'm going to return to that point in a moment, but Joel Millman, first of all, it may be instructive to take a look at the fact that the European Union set up a working group on security, as it was put, way back in 2004, which has met a few times. But the majority of that group are, in fact, arms companies or technological organizations. Your organization, for example, the International Organization for Migration, was not represented on that working group. Neither was the UNHCR. This appears to show a very skewed perception of how to deal with the problem, does it not?
Well, you're dating me a little bit. I was before my time joining IOM. However, I agree with you. One of the things we talk about here in Geneva is that 40 years ago this summer, when our Director General was a young Foreign Service officer in the U.S. State Department, we saw the frightening expulsion of people from Southeast Asia, the so-called boat people. And as horrible as it was, and it was pretty horrible after the fall of Saigon, the way the world community came together to assist these people from countries from all over the world to find haven, to get them first to Thailand to safety, then to begin to resettle them by the hundreds of thousands throughout the world, was quite remarkable. And we in Geneva, who work in this industry, if I may call it that, are actually in despair at how easily countries have decided they can't do anything. How the first position is nothing we do works and we don't know how, strikes us as ignoring their own history when the world pulled together in a place very distant, very dangerous, and threw together and helped hundreds of thousands of people. Most of them have become very successful in their new countries.
Well, Christopher Miller, just continuing on this issue of cost, or rather where money is put, statistics reveal that since 2000, for example, the 28 EU states have deported millions of people. The cost of those deportations, that's well over $11 billion. Once again, huge amounts of money spent getting people out of nations rather than money being spent helping them get assimilated into societies.
Absolutely. You're right. I mean, this is money that could be better spent on integrating these people into European society rather than sending them back out. And I think a very good point was made earlier in regards to some of the backgrounds of these people. Many of the Syrians I spoke with last night at the port while they were waiting to board this processing ship were telling me that they were former engineers, architects, accountants, people with MBAs, master's degree in everything from history to accounting. These are people with valuable skills that could integrate into society fairly well. I actually read a very interesting Guardian article today of a small town German mayor who was inviting migrants and refugees to come and live in his town. And I think that this should be a model for other European cities, hopefully larger ones to follow.
Well, people are still struggling with the consequence of events over which they have no control. The mayor of Kos, for example, says there's a danger the situation on the island could become uncontrollable and lead to further violence. Let's hear what else he had to say.
The problem will be solved when the community of the European Union will understand that in Syria there is war, and in other countries there are major economic problems. And if they don't find a solution to those countries for their problems, we'll always have immigration problems in Europe.
Well, Joe Millman, there we have the very clear expression that the root causes of migration, the root causes that lead to consequences of what is happening in Kos or people drowning in the Mediterranean are simply not being addressed. Your view?
Well, we've been saying the same thing. However, we always say that it is not an easy problem to address. Nobody thinks there's a political solution to Syria on the horizon, nor do they see a ceasefire and a stable government emerging anytime soon in Libya. It'll happen. It'll happen eventually. It always does. It's just that these are things that this is part of the reason there's so much fatigue in the world and so much hopelessness about whether or not these problems can be addressed. They know what the root problem is, and they don't see the tools available to address them. All we can do at IOM and other similar organizations is advocate for the people who are caught in the crossfire, support them, advocate for their rights, remind people that they're our fellow human citizens, and try to find safety for them. That's the short term. And then, of course, the long-term view is begin to work towards a political solution in those countries.
Well, Tom Brooks, I want to return to a point that you brought up a little bit earlier, and that is in terms of the quality of would-be migrants. The issue is that there may be benefit in accepting migrants to host countries. I remember in previous centuries, great nations were built on migration. The United States, for example. Does there have to be a change in the mindset of certain countries that immigration is not necessarily a threat? It could also be a benefit?
I think there has to be a lot of work done in that direction. So, for example, take the United Kingdom, where I'm a citizen and live now. Here you have a lot of reaction by politicians of all the parties, a lot of public antipathy, a lot of concern about the levels of migration and the effects that has on public services and so on neighborhoods. And yet politicians are too easily react to this rather than try to make the case. That there's too little of politicians standing up and saying things like, this is why asylum seekers are worth taking on. This is why our country values taking on legitimate asylum seekers and giving people a new lease on life and giving them a helping hand. And even why economic migration might be seen as a good thing. In the last general election we had a few months ago, it was pointed out by one of the political leaders that contesting the election that he would stop migration even if it meant damaging the economy. You have very strong views against taking on more migration, a lot of skepticism about what good it might bring the country. This is not just true of the UK, it's true of other places too. I think politicians need to stand up more, not necessarily arguing for open borders as such, but to say something about why refugees should be welcomed where we find them, why they deserve help, and why migration is not always a problem, why it can be a benefit to countries, because that is a case that's not being made.
Well, Joel Millman, another issue appears to be the refusal of certain states to accept responsibility. A startling statistic, for example, is that Lebanon, a tiny country, 1 in every 4 people living there at the moment is a refugee from Syria. Patrick Kingsley in The Guardian has pointed out that in a country 100 times smaller than the EU has taken in 50 times as many refugees as the EU. Now, surely this is an absolute abrogation of any form of responsibility by the more developed nations, is it not?
Well, we've been saying the same thing, and I'm sure we talked to the Guardian correspondent about this as well. Jordan's another example. Even Libya and Egypt have kept their borders open during times of crisis. We understand that the images that accompany this population are severe. The recent history of war that involve troops from all over the world affects the attitudes of citizens of those countries. I agree with the speaker before who talked about politicians too readily pandering to this kind of prejudice. All of these things are conditions that are true. All we can say is that migration is unstoppable, it is inevitable, it is necessary, and it's practically always beneficial. So we do need to see perception changes in all the receiving countries, and absolutely we agree that their resources are adequate to repatriate and resettle people. But this is a long process. We better get used to it. We better roll up our sleeves and get to work, because it's going to happen, and it's going to have to be managed effectively.
Christopher Miller, to stay within the same kind of point, I mentioned a little bit earlier that in past centuries, huge countries dealt with migration, in fact, encouraged it, the US, Australia, for example. The bulk of those immigrants were, in fact, European. The bulk of immigrants today are African or Arab. Is that a possibility why migration is not quite as easy now as it was in the past? Are we looking at basically, and putting it bluntly, a racist position in terms of who can move or who can't?
That's a good question. I wouldn't go as far as to say there's a racist element to it. In some cases, perhaps there is. I think right now, given the economic situation in the EU, that has more to do with it, many countries just being skeptical as to whether or not they can actually take on people as they're coming in. I don't know what the exact solution should be, and our other my colleagues speaking with us will probably have better answers than me as to what that might be. But I hope that we're going to be hearing some soon.
Tom Brooks, I mean, your view about that particular point, is there a differing idea in developed countries as to who should come in and who shouldn't? And in fact, in a rebuttal of history of those particular countries, for example?
Well, I think I agree with the previous commentator on the point about money. I think at the moment there's a lot of countries in the European Union that are struggling a bit. There's pressures on public services. There's been austerity measures in the UK. There's been austerity in much greater depth elsewhere. And I think with migration, what's happened with migrants is that whoever they are, wherever they're from, whatever their background, whatever country they come from, they are seen as a problem. So when people have trouble finding jobs, the problem is the scapegoating of migrants. The migrants must be getting it. There's a problem with housing, it must be the migrants. A problem with how can we afford procedures and the various healthcare services across different European nations? Well, it must be the burden of health tourists from elsewhere and migrants. Migration has been something that's been easily picked up as this kind of easy target because migrants, of course, can't vote in elections or are from outside Europe. They don't really have any kind of voice politically in these different countries, and so easy to pick on in a bit. So I think that really what's going on is that the economic situation, when the economies were doing a lot better in different European nations, and there was migration then as well, you didn't have quite this kind of problem. You didn't have quite these kinds of concerns. People weren't as alarmed or worried or talked about being swamped and other kinds of things like you are hearing now. I think a big part is people are getting less services in their countries. There's a lot of pressures on jobs, public sector salary freezes, etc. And then you see migrants coming in who will require some assistance as their cases for refugee status are being heard, etc., and so forth, and seen as kind of dipping their hands in a pot that's already shrinking and has built up some resentment. A lot of it, I think, unwarranted. And again, I think the politicians have something to answer for that.
Well, a multi-layered problem of which cost is just one consequence. And let's hope this debate continues. My thanks to our guests.
Yes.
From Kos, Christopher Miller, in Geneva, Joel Millman, and in Durham, Tom Brooks. If you have any comments about today's show, you can get in touch by going to our program page at aljazeera.com or post your comments on facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or tweet us at AJ Inside Story. From me, Mike Hanna, and the whole team, goodbye for now.